Egypt, a land of hidden treasures, buried secrets, and centuries-old mysteries left unsolved. Perhaps the greatest of these is the Sphinx. No one knows for sure who built it or when.
The fact that it is so majestic urges one to say, who is it?
It's a 4,500-year-old puzzle, but now the latest science is offering new clues. As theories emerge, the traditional version of history is being challenged. Could the riddle of the Sphinx now be solved in a wholly unexpected way? A lion with the face of a pharaoh. The Sphinx towers above the Giza Plateau. It's presided here for more than 4,500 years. It represents one of the largest, oldest puzzles in archaeology.
We don't know exactly who built the Sphinx because nobody left their name on the Sphinx.
For a long time, the most widely held view has been that it was carved by a pharaoh called Khafre around 2540 BC. He had it cut at Giza in his own image from a single piece of rock. Over time, it's been buried in sand, then dug out again. It's seen invading armies. It's been an object of study. Napoleon led an expedition here. It's been vandalized. It even appears to have been used for target practice. But it still stands, guarding the approach to the pyramids. So what evidence exists to suggest who built the Sphinx? Why believe the pharaoh Khafre was responsible?
Our best clue as to who built the Sphinx is its location. It is right immediately adjacent to the Valley Temple and the causeway of King Khafre's pyramid complex.
We know Khafre built himself a pyramid and a temple here. The causeway that links them leads right past the Sphinx. What's more, the temple and the statue both lie on the same line.
Therefore, you almost have to assume that Khafre built it.
Dr. Zahi Hawass has studied the Sphinx for over 20 years. He's convinced it is Khafre's work. For him, the proof lies on a giant stone tablet that lies between the statue's paws. Known as the Dream Stela, it's inscribed with the story about the pharaoh Thutmose IV. It says that as a young prince, Thutmose hunted here. Exhausted by the heat of the sun, he lay down to rest and slept in the shade of the half-buried Sphinx.
The Sphinx in that time was covered completely with sand. Then Thutmose IV had a dream. The Sphinx dream told him, "My son Thutmose, I'm dying because the sand is killing me. If you remove the sand, I will make you the king of Egypt."
According to the stela, Thutmose removed the sand and was crowned pharaoh. Thutmose himself ordered the carving of this tablet so that the legend would live on. But what really interests Egyptologists about the stela is another line of text.
In this hieroglyphic text, there is some letters from the name of Khafre.
Although they're partially worn away, some of the symbols that make up the name of Khafre can clearly be seen. Many archaeologists have taken this as hard evidence that it was Khafre who built the Sphinx. Dr. Hawass believes he has further proof. The causeway that leads to Khafre's pyramid has a drainage ditch which empties into the area of the Sphinx's enclosure. Hawass reasons that the causeway would not have been built in this way if the Sphinx was already standing there.
The Egyptians will never build this drainage when the Sphinx is here. No way. And that can really date the Sphinx after the causeway, means to Khafre.
The drainage channel, the position of the Sphinx in relation to Khafre's pyramid, the fact his name appears to be on the dream stela. All the evidence seems to say that Khafre built the Sphinx. For almost 2 centuries, Egyptologists agreed.
That's the way it was, and we accepted that as received wisdom, and no one ever questioned whether or not the identification stuck.
Only in the last few years has this started to change. There are new theories and new ideas, some from outside the world of Egyptology. They fuel the debate. What if the Sphinx was built by someone other than Khafre? Questioning the Khafre theory anew, Egyptologists have tried to see if the Sphinx does in fact look like its builder. Is it a likeness of the pharaoh? Luckily, Khafre seems to have been enamored of his own image. There are no less than 9 statues available for comparison, all recovered from Khafre's Valley Temple. At first glance, there is a resemblance, but there's also an anomaly. In every other statue, Khafre wears a ceremonial false beard. So why isn't there one on the largest statue of them all, the Sphinx? There may be an easy explanation. When the dream stela was found in 1816, archaeologists also found large fragments of a stone beard. Had it simply crumbled from the face of the Sphinx? By piecing together the fragments, we can recreate a Sphinx that resembles both Khafre's statues and the image on the dream stela. But leading Egyptologist Dr. Rainer Stadelmann has a problem with this idea. He believes the beard is the wrong style for the period.
The beard which we know is of the New Kingdom, and this is absolutely clear. It is a rounded beard with decoration on the side. So it is not an original beard.
Stadelmann believes the beard which was found wasn't part of the original carving, but added more than 1,000 years later, around the time of Thutmose IV and the erection of the dream stela. Egyptologist Vasil Dobrev has been studying the Sphinx since 1987. He believes the small Sphinx in front of the Cairo Museum offers further proof that the beard wasn't there when the Sphinx was first carved.
Here we have an excellent example of a Sphinx with a beard from the origin. When the beard has been cut out, you can see the traces of the beard. With the Sphinx, it's exactly the opposite. The chin is perfect and there is absolutely no traces of a beard, which shows the Sphinx has been done without a beard from the beginning. Otherwise, he has to look like this.
If there was a beard in the beginning, but it fell off or was cut away, there ought to be some sort of mark or damage. So there are problems with the theory that the pharaoh Khafre built the Sphinx. But what about the dream stela? It appears to tie the Sphinx explicitly to Khafre. Rainer Stadelmann has found evidence to suggest that it isn't as straightforward as it seems. He's been examining another tablet dating from around the same time.
This wonderful stela was found about 100 years later than the dream stela. And it is completely forgotten. Nobody talks about it. It is just beside the Sphinx, and it repeats the same phrase as the dream stela, but it talks about Khafre and Khufu.
Khufu, a second name now being connected to the Sphinx. Since Khafre's name appears here, the assumption was that the Sphinx was his. But this new name changes that. Khafre's father Khufu wasn't just any pharaoh. He was perhaps the greatest builder of ancient Egypt, the builder of the Great Pyramid. Was the Sphinx his work rather than his son's? Re-examining the evidence, archaeologists are starting to rewrite history. It's been widely accepted that the Sphinx was the work of the pharaoh Khafre, but Egyptologist Rainer Stadelmann has come to question this theory. He now believes that Khafre's father, Khufu, carved the statue. He finds further clues in the way the Sphinx sits in the landscape. Today we approach the Sphinx from Cairo. Khafre's pyramid seems to stand directly behind it. However, when the pyramids were built, Cairo didn't exist. Visitors approached from the ancient capital of Memphis, which lay to the south. Another pyramid seems to loom behind the Sphinx. This is the Great Pyramid of Khufu.
When Khufu built his pyramid, you came from the south and you had clearly the view of the Sphinx in a profile with the pyramid of Khufu.
The question is, are we meant to view the Sphinx from the front or from the side? The ancient Egyptians were certainly keen on seeing life in profile. Almost all their representations of people, pharaohs and animals show them side on. It's possible this approach can be seen in the construction of the Sphinx.
If the Sphinx looks to the right, this is his perfect position. And that's why the tail of the Sphinx is to the right. And all the Sphinxes in Egypt will have the tail to the right, because it has to be visible. And that is the position where I have to look to the Sphinx. From the south, where he's from right to left, and behind him is the Great Pyramid.
Khufu built the Great Pyramid. He devoted his reign and his kingdom to this, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Did he also have the means and the manpower to carve the Sphinx? Khufu's was the first pyramid on the Giza Plateau. Many consider him to be the greatest of the pyramid builders.
Khufu was a great king who came to Giza. He chose not only the place of the pyramid, he chose everything around.
His quarries were vast. He stripped this area of a layer of stone. So why would he leave one hill of rock untouched?
Everything was so wonderfully planned that it would be astonishing if within the quarries a huge mountain of stone would have been left until, let's say, 30 years later, Khafre would have carved the Sphinx out of it.
Rainer Stadelmann also noticed something about the causeway which leads to Khafre's pyramid.
The causeway is not in a straight line. It really tilts, it really bends to the south, and one has to ask, why does it do this?
The reason it made that turn is because we think there was a pre-existing monument here, and the pre-existing monument had to have been the Sphinx.
So the causeway suggests that the Sphinx was created before Khafre's reign, and his father Khufu was the first pharaoh at Giza.
All these findings point for me absolutely secure that it is Khufu who created the Sphinx.
But how can we know if the Sphinx bears Khufu's face? While there are many statues of Khafre, the only contemporary likeness of Khufu is this tiny figurine.
You cannot compare a statue 5 centimeters long with a huge colossi like the Sphinx. You can't do that.
But Jonathan Foyle, a historical architect, is going to try. He's come to Egypt to try to decide which of the two pharaohs, Khufu or Khafre, the Sphinx most closely resembles.
I've been involved in buildings all my life, and historic buildings at that. And frankly, for a 5,000-year-old depiction of the human face at the same kind of time as Stonehenge, it's unbelievably well done. It really is. I mean, it's very close to human proportions. I like to draw by using a ruler, and I hold it up at arm's length, and I scale it up. So I build up a network of points on the page which guarantee me that when I draw it, it's a pretty accurate representation of the proportions of this thing. I really want to see whether it resembles contemporary statues of the characters of Khufu and Khafre. So let's see what we come up with through the proportions of the thing.
If the Sphinx does resemble the pharaoh for whom it was carved, that would be an impressive achievement. The head is more than 13 feet wide and 30 feet high. Even creating a symmetrical shape, let alone any kind of likeness, would require enormous skill. But has Foyle discovered anything in his drawing which might resolve whether the Sphinx looks like either pharaoh?
I've got enough on the Sphinx's face to be able to get the main proportions, because although the nose has gone, the eyes are still there, and through the shadows you can still pick out the width of the mouth. And those are really good measurements because it tells you whether you've got a broad or narrow face, and you can compare them then with other sculptures. Now I've got the portrait statues of Khafre and Khufu that I've drawn previously. So when you look at them close up, Khafre is actually quite tall and slender in his proportions with a slim nose. He's the person who I would have guessed that the Sphinx is modelled on, but it's largely because of the convention of the sculpture. You've got a headdress in the same way, it's very finely wrought. But Khufu, the less likely contender when you first see it on the small statuette, is much broader. And actually, proportionally, is almost bang on the Sphinx. If you're taking what people saw at the time and comparing, trying to look through their eyes, my guess would be that the Sphinx is more likely to represent Khufu than Khafre.
So the Sphinx's facial proportions appear to be more similar to Khafre's father, Khufu. Jonathan Foyle's analysis is telling, but on its own, it doesn't settle the debate. Egyptologist Vasil Dobrev has searched the archive for more information on Khufu's appearance. In particular, he wants to know if the pharaoh ever wore a beard.
We have several other images of Khufu coming from different places which represent him without a beard. But these documents have been just forgotten. They were never taken into consideration. Here we have rock inscription in Sinai of Khufu, where he is clearly represented without a beard. And even more important, two other documents from his own mortuary temple in Giza, and a small fragment of a vessel, of a bowl. The king is represented completely seated, and he's also without a beard. In fact, what we discovered is not only the small statue that everybody knows, but actually 100% of the known images of Khufu represent him without a beard. So this is a very strong argument to show that the Sphinx without a beard could be, in fact, Khufu.
But Vasil Dobrev believes we need to go further. To understand how Khufu's face came to adorn the Sphinx, we need to delve into the story of his family. It's a tale of treachery, revenge, and murder. For many years, the carving of the Sphinx has been attributed to the pharaoh Khafre. But some archaeologists doubt this theory, proposing instead that it was Khafre's father, Khufu. Vasil Dobrev suggests a different idea altogether. He points to another of Khufu's sons.
I think that the Sphinx was built by the son of Khufu, called Jedefre, who reigned immediately after the death of his father.
Djefri is a little-known pharaoh. The details of his reign are obscure. It's often represented as a troubled time in his family's history. Khufu had 9 sons in all. Khafre is the best known, since his pyramid stands next to his father's on the Giza Plateau. But he did have 2 older brothers. The question has to be asked, where are their pyramids? The eldest son, Khewab, simply didn't live long enough. He died before he could become pharaoh. But the second, Djefri, did take the throne. He chose to build his pyramid 5 miles north of Giza at Abu Rawash. The Victorian archaeologist George Reisner construed these facts as a fantastic saga of murder and revenge. He decided that upon Khufu's death, his son Djefri must have murdered his older brother Khewab and so seized the throne. The theory was that Djefri turned his back on the family and showed this symbolically by moving away from Giza to build his pyramid. Vasil Dobrev rejects this long-accepted version of events. He doesn't believe that the evidence supports any of Reisner's conclusions. Among Giza's labyrinth of tombs and tunnels, Dobrev has focused on one particular burial. It's off-limits to the public and rarely seen. This tomb held the daughter of the brother that Djefri supposedly murdered. The key clues are in the paintings that line the walls.
Inside this tomb, we have the best preserved image of Prince Khewab. Here he is, and behind him we have his daughter represented, giving to her father offerings coming from different places of Egypt. The names of these places contain the cartouche of Khufu, and this is normal.
The cartouche is a symbolic ring of rope used in hieroglyphics to identify and protect the name of an Egyptian king.
One of the names contains the cartouche of Djedefre. If Djedefre was the murderer of Khewab, why should his name be here? He is banned. It just doesn't make any sense that Djedefre was considered as a murderer by these people.
If Djedefre had killed his brother Khewab, his image would have no place in the tomb of Khewab's daughter. Vasil Dobrev believes she can't have considered Djefri a murderer. Archaeologist Peter Brand has been investigating what remains of Djefri's pyramid. Reisner's story describes how Djefri moved here in disgrace, and this pyramid was never completed because his younger brother Khafre killed him in revenge. Khafre took the throne and desecrated Djefri's pyramid. But again, on closer examination, this part of Reisner's story also fails to stand up. Both Djefri's father Khufu and his grandfather chose new sites for their pyramids. So there's nothing to say that Djefri was doing anything unusual when he moved away from Giza.
I think it makes sense for Djefri to actually move away from his dad's pyramid. He realizes that he's not going to be able to build a pyramid as big as Khufu's, and so he chooses a site that is advantageous because it's away from his father's on a higher plateau. It will actually be as high or higher in the sky than his father's.
Situated on a natural rise overlooking the Giza Plateau, it would have been visible for miles around. Recent excavations have revealed that the pyramid probably was once complete. Its sides would have been steeper than the Great Pyramid. It was cased in the finest pink granite and white limestone. Its location meant that its pinnacle would have stood fractionally higher than that of the Great Pyramid.
So Reisner's theory makes a good read, but I think it belongs in the historical fiction section of the library. He was essentially making history up. He assumed that Djefri was a usurper, because the pyramid seems to have been dismantled, he suspects perhaps Khafre had done it. Now, I suppose it's possible, but when you add up the evidence, what do you have? You have a pyramid that's ruined, you have some broken statuary that were not actually intentionally defaced, and you have an older brother who could have died for any number of reasons without having been murdered by his younger brother Jedefre.
But it's not just that Reisner's theory lacks solid proof. Strong evidence is emerging to refute it. An extraordinary discovery suggests that Jedefre, far from turning his back, kept strong links with the memory of his father. This is the solar boat of Khufu. It laid buried for almost 4,500 years, right next to his pyramid.
This boat was found in 1954 by accident and was found dismantled in pieces south of the Great Pyramid of Khufu.
Today it's been restored to the state in which it was buried as part of Khufu's funeral rite. This boat was a gift to Khufu, intended to carry him in splendor into the netherworld and the afterlife. Its giver had great wealth and also great respect for Khufu. Dr. Hawass can put a name to that person. He goes down into the pit where the find was made. The boat itself lay in 1,224 parts beneath 41 slabs of limestone. It was only when all these objects were removed that archaeologists found what they were looking for.
The most important thing that has been found in this pit is 18 cartouches of the name of Jedefre. There is one in the top of that blocks and another cartouche in the north side. The discovery of the cartouches inside this pit show Jedefre is the one that supervised putting the boat in the pit for his father.
This is the proof that Jedefre was intimately involved in the funeral of his father at Giza.
The putting of these boats inside, under the surrounding wall of Khufu, hidden, shows that Jedefre wanted to help his father in his afterlife.
Jedefre clearly had a large, skilled workforce at his disposal, capable of undertaking complex construction. This alone suggests he may have had the means to build the Sphinx. We also now have evidence that during his reign and at his bidding, those men were working nearby. But it appears the connection may go far deeper.
You know, for somebody who's so famous and so important in Egyptian history, it's amazing how little we really know about Khufu.
The only evidence we have are stories told about him by later Egyptians. One of these tales, known as the West Ka Papyrus, suggests that Khufu had an unsavory reputation.
Khufu, suffering from boredom, hears about a magician who's able to perform wonderful treats. The magician amuses Khufu with a bunch of dismemberments. And so, for example, in one episode, he takes apart a crocodile and puts the crocodile back together, tail to head. And the crocodile waddles him around the middle of the floor. And Khufu says, "Whoa, that's cool. I've got a prisoner. Why don't we bring this guy over and you can take him apart and put him together the same way?" And the magician reprimands the king right to his face and said, "We don't treat human beings in this despicable kind of a way." And here we have the seeds, if you will, of what is going to be the posthumous denigration of Khufu's memory as this horrible tyrant who absolutely was despicable, a tyrant in the worst sense of the word.
Not only that, but by building the world's largest pyramid, he put his people under heavy strain. It lies in the inheritance that Khufu had left for his son. The building of the Great Pyramid had required more than 5 million tons of rock. It took decades to complete. Inside the Great Pyramid, Dr. Zahi Hawass marvels at the mobilization of people and resources which building on this scale would have required.
All of it built of granite. The top huge blocks, each is about 16 tons weight. We know Egyptian brought granite from Aswan, over 600 miles south of the pyramids.
These granite slabs must have been brought down the Nile on vast boats. What Khufu had asked for and got was unprecedented in either scale or expense. Egypt paid the price as a nation.
The construction of the pyramids was putting an enormous economic drain on the economy of the land. And there are some people that maintain within this context that the pyramids absolutely bankrupted the country of Egypt because of the endeavor that was necessary to create them.
Which means that when Djedefre came in power, the loving son of Khufu, he had to remobilize the people of Egypt because he wanted for himself a pyramid.
The Djedefre wanted a pyramid. It was the key to his eternal life, a fundamental necessity. But he'd inherited an overstretched, run-down nation. Basil Dobrev has come up with a theory. It doesn't just explain how Djedefre gained the support of his people to build his pyramid.
I believe that Djedefre built the Sphinx for his dead father, Khufu, and that the Sphinx represents the King Khufu as a resurrected king.
Dobrev believes that Djedefre carved the Sphinx not to represent himself, but in the image of his powerful father, Khufu. The Sphinx was there to spur people on.
They did it by the fear, and the fear came from the image of the Sphinx representing the dead king Khufu resurrected. So he's back again. He's watching the people. So that's why later the people called the Sphinx Abul Khol, Father the Terror.
Dobrev believes that Djedefre is not so much honoring his father as invoking him as a threat. The grip Khufu held on Egypt was powerful enough to be felt even after his death. In Dobrev's view, this is why Djedefre ordered his workers to make a likeness of his father. The largest statue ever conceived, unprecedented in ambition, and never matched. The Sphinx. It's a neat theory. It explains the statue's face, but it does contain one flaw. New evidence suggests the Sphinx predates the pyramids. It's led one researcher to a radical theory. Did this statue once wear another, very different face? Archaeologists have arrived at the theory that after the building of the Great Pyramid had bled Egypt dry, the pharaoh Djedefre needed something to restore his people's faith in the pharaoh's power. He built the Sphinx. How could he have achieved such an exceptional feat when there's no record of anything like this ever having been built before?
It's the first Sphinx, we think, that's ever been built on such a massive scale.
Not only was it unprecedented, it has also never been matched. It was only when Mount Rushmore was carved that anyone came close. Even these faces are only 59 feet high, compared to the Sphinx's 65 feet. The Statue of Liberty is 150 feet, but she's made of copper sheets hammered together over an inner structure of steel. The Great Sphinx is truly unique. How was it that nearly 5,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians could undertake a construction of this scale and accuracy? stonemason Danny Roy is an expert in ancient Egyptian restoration.
In the old days, in ancient Egypt, they would have used a wooden mallet. This is a modern day mallet, but the chisel I'm using is a replica of what they would have used back in the days. Copper is pretty soft, but to carve limestone like this one, it does the job.
With simple scaffolding and primitive tools, the ancient Egyptians embarked on this ambitious project. Even today, with the help of modern tools, carving a small sphinx is a major operation. Back then, it would have been epic.
It was a massive construction site. You would have needed stone cutters, stonemason, of course, blacksmith, carpenters to make wooden apparatus.
To carve a sphinx today entails much the same techniques. Initially, huge blocks would have been quarried away to reveal the basic shape of the sphinx. These were new skills, never tried before. No room for error, no second chances. Slowly, as the details started to emerge, skilled craftsmen took over from quarrymen. The tough job of ensuring even proportions and a good likeness came to the fore. Today, the Sphinx still maintains its looks and much of its detail. But when first fashioned, it had another level of adornment.
You can see remains of the color still exist on the face. That it was really colorful image.
So we think that the fleshy parts of the Sphinx may have been colored red. That red is an Egyptian convention for male flesh. Female flesh in the Old Kingdom is generally yellow. So we know that the Sphinx represents a man, not a woman. And we're assuming that the headdress might have been striped almost like Tutankhamun, maybe alternating gold and blue. I'm not sure if we got enough color to prove that, to demonstrate that. But certainly it was well colored.
It would have been an extraordinary sight. A fitting representation of the king, carved out of the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. But geologist Colin Reeder believes the question of the Sphinx's origins can be approached quite differently. He's found evidence to suggest yet another alternative theory. To understand it, we need to look at the enclosure walls that surround the sculpture.
To actually get the full height of the body, they had to cut away all the limestone to form this quarry, if you like, what we call the Sphinx enclosure.
These enclosure walls were man-made, but since their creation, they've been heavily eroded. It gives them this round or coved look, particularly in the western walls of the enclosure directly behind the Sphinx. Reeder is convinced this weathering came about when, after big rainstorms, water flowed over the Giza Plateau into the Sphinx enclosure.
The Giza Plateau slopes in exactly the right way. Here, the top of the Sphinx enclosure, the ground continues to rise for about a mile beyond the Pyramid of Khafra. So this is quite a large rain catchment area.
However, Reeder believes that pattern of flooding was interrupted when Khufu built his pyramid. Just over 90 feet up the slope from the Sphinx enclosure, there's a quarry now filled with sand. The stone that it provided became Khufu's pyramid.
That quarry, if you imagine it as a large basin in the surface of the plateau, it will have picked up all this runoff. Rather than the runoff coming all the way across the surface of the plateau and then discharging into the Sphinx enclosure, suddenly it discharges into the quarry.
In Reeder's mind, this can only mean one thing.
The Sphinx has to have been present at Giza before the first pyramid was built.
Reeder's investigation of the erosion here has led him to a new theory, one which questions the Sphinx's true age. Khufu's quarry stopped the runoff into the Sphinx enclosure, but the walls still show signs of long-term erosion. It means the enclosure must have been there before the quarry, and the Sphinx must have stood for some time before the pyramids. If Colin Reeder is right, how far back do we need to go? Stoneworking only began around the first dynasty of Egyptian civilization, 400 years before the construction of the pyramids at Giza. That gives reader a time frame. Most archaeologists think that Giza was not much more than a desert till the pyramids were built. But the Sphinx couldn't have simply sprung up in isolation. So reader scoured the literature and the hundreds of smaller burial sites which surround the pyramids. He was hunting for the very earliest tombs.
We don't have much evidence for early tombs at Giza, but this is partly probably also because what was there, or may have been there, was overbuilt by later constructions.
The pyramids were 3 vast monuments quarried and erected over a period of decades. There must have been thousands of workers. Giza must have been, in its time, the largest building site on Earth. So if there are no traces to be found at Giza of older tombs or structures, it should come as no surprise. And yet Colin Reeder noticed something that's been almost overlooked. This tomb at Giza seems to have features which make it older than the pyramids. It resembles a sunken palace. When the pyramid builders came, they reused it and modified it. These modifications camouflage the tomb's true age.
Finally, in this tomb, I've got evidence that there was activity at Giza before the building of the pyramids, before the reign of Khufu. Everything's pointing towards perhaps a 2nd dynasty date.
Colin Reeder came here with geological evidence suggesting the Sphinx was older than the pyramids. The tomb proves earlier Egyptians did build here. It also seems to have been adapted and used by later generations. Perhaps the same was true of the Sphinx. Was it already here, built by someone else, when one of the pyramid-building pharaohs took it and altered it to suit his own ends? That's what Colin Reeder believes, and he's willing to propose one last radical theory which he believes solves the mystery of the Sphinx. He thinks the Sphinx started life as a lion. Recent investigations into the Sphinx have led to the suggestion that it may be much older than originally thought, and that it was only restored by the pyramid-building pharaohs hundreds of years after its original creation. Jonathan Foyle from the World Monument Fund is using his expertise to test this proposal.
The front view of the Sphinx is one of the most famous views in the world. There's no surprise because it's so powerful, but come round the side and it starts to get a bit weird, because when you draw it to scale, this half man, half lion is a pretty stretched out looking beast. It's like it's been on a torture rack or something and stretched out of all proportion. So is this choice or is it circumstance?
A conventional explanation for these unusual proportions is that while carving the body of the Sphinx, the builders ran into problems.
Just in front of the hind legs of the lion, you've got the concrete. You can see it's all been poured and textured. Now, I remember seeing old photos of the Sphinx, and there's a fissure in that area, natural cleavage in the rock. You see it shaded there on the drawing, but obviously it's been filled in during a restoration. Now, if there is a fissure and those big hindquarters are just behind it, is that what made the lion too long? Did they build the legs behind that great crack in the rock, treating that as a weakness? Did they think that if they put the hindquarters in front of it, for example, the lion would be too short? So that's a question I've got. So I'm going to draw what I reckon is a regular proportioned lion against the Sphinx's head and see where it would have come up.
Dr. Zahi Hawass believes there's a simple way to explain the Sphinx's strange proportions. There's only one way to demonstrate it, and that is to climb where very few people have ever been, onto the back of the great Sphinx itself. From this new angle, the first thing that becomes apparent is the true scale of what the men who built the Sphinx achieved more than 4,500 years ago.
I think this is the first time that I take a TV camera to the top of the Sphinx. Because when you see the head of the Sphinx from down, you can feel that the proportion of the head is not fitting with the body of the Sphinx. But if you come to this size, you really see how it's really huge, and it fits exactly with the body of the Sphinx. If the ancient Egyptian will make the head bigger than that, it will not fit with the body of the Sphinx.
So Dr. Hawass believes it's simply a question of perception. The head and body are in proportion. Does Jonathan Foyle agree?
Well, I've gone from this drawing showing the Sphinx as it is, with a small head and long skinny lion's body with a fissure just there, and explored a drawing which shows a big cat's body sitting quite alert in more accurate proportions. Well, if that's what the Sphinx builders had in mind when they started off with the head, I don't think that fissure in the rock is a big deal, because they're clever masons. They could have packed it out. Then why not just make good if they wanted that shape in the first place? And it's not just the back end that's affected. They've stretched the front legs out in proportion as well. But there's one other possible scenario, that this head that seems small by comparison, what if, once upon a time, this lion's body was in perfect proportion to a bigger head that since has been cut down and reshaped?
So who or what did this first head represent? For the ancient Egyptians, the lion seems to have held a special significance.
About 3000 BC, there were lions around. The climate was quite different. What is now desert was then savanna.
The Egyptians were probably the first human beings that we know of to represent the king as a lion.
The Egyptians liked to hunt the lion, but also liked to identify with the lion by giving the name lion to people. There was a king lion, for example.
If you look at one of these pre-dynastic slate palettes called the battlefield palette, it shows many people involved in conflict, and in the midst of this battle is a rampant lion that almost certainly represents an early king that has become a lion to express his overwhelming power against his enemies.
Colin Reeder believes that, put together, all this evidence points towards a radical conclusion.
In early dynastic thought, the lion, rather than the human-headed Sphinx, was an important sort of theological concept. And maybe what we had at Giza was not a Sphinx at all originally, but a lion.
Not the head of a pharaoh, but the head of a lion. It would certainly explain the statue's unusual proportions. Most significantly, it means Colin Reeder's redating can be explained in a way that doesn't contradict the evidence uncovered by generations of Egyptologists. Reeder believes that Khufu may even have chosen Giza as the site for his pyramid because of the lion statue that already existed. And when Khufu's son Djeffrey came here, perhaps it was he who had the lion recarved into the head of his much-feared dead father. The result is the face that we know. At one time, Egyptologists thought the statue's age and identity were clear beyond doubt. Now, there are a number of ways to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. Some believe it was built by Khufu. Some say it was his son. Some say the Sphinx stood long before either. It may be that in time, new clues and different names will emerge. Somewhere, there may be the final clinching piece of evidence which explains this extraordinary statue.
Many people in the past, as we do today, try to reveal the mystery of the Sphinx. But I always tell people that the mystery of the Sphinx will never stop. It will always continue.